Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to a council public hearing for Wednesday, October the 7th, electronic meeting pursuant to section 238, 3.3 of the Municipal Act 2001. Public hearing statement that I will read to you is: if a person or public body does not make an oral submission at a public meeting or make a written submission to the city of Richmond Hill in respect of a proposed official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and/or plan of subdivision or condominium, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the city council to LPAC. It may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before LPAC unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there is reasonable grounds to do so. So what we are doing today, this evening, is as part of program here is to provide the public an opportunity to make representation to council, in relation to decisions that will be made by council at a future council meeting. So no decisions will be made at public council meetings at this time. So with that, we are going to move forward, and we have two items on our agenda. Could I get a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Councilor West, Councilor Stilovitz, all those in favor, opposed, carried. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest, the nature of thereof, seeing none. Thank you. And our scheduled business now is we start off at item 3.1, request for comments, zoning bylaw amendment application, Zonix Group, Harris, 229 Harris Avenue. And at this point in time, I shall call on our Jeff Healy from our planning department to explain the application that's before us.
Thank you, Mary Barrow, and good evening to you and members of council and the public. The first item tonight involves a proposed zoning bylaw amendment for the lands municipally known as 229 Harris Avenue. Next slide, please. The subject lands are located on the south side of Harris Avenue, mid-block between Settlement Crescent to the east and Beach Avenue to the west. The lands have a total area of approximately 0.416 hectares, or a little over 1 acre. Surrounding uses include existing residential uses to the east and west, draft approved and proposed residential uses to the north, and conservation lands to the south. The lands are a designated neighborhood and natural core in the city's official plan and are situated within the Harris Beach infill study. The neighborhood designation permits for low density development, and the infill study directs for low density development within this portion of the study area. With respect to zoning, the lands are zoned urban zone under bylaw 12804 as amended. It supports the existing residential neighborhood fabric, and the applicant's proposing to rezone the lands to semi-detached RD1 zone under bylaw 23597 to implement the applicant's development proposal. Next slide, please. The applicant is seeking approval of zoning bylaw amendment to facilitate the creation of 3 semi-detached dwelling lots for the total of 6 dwelling units fronting onto Harris Avenue. The proposed lot frontages are 15.6 meters and lot areas are approximately 902 square meters. The owner will submit an appropriate severance application upon completion of zoning bylaw amendment application. Purpose of this report is to provide council and the public with an overview of the applications, and it has been submitted for information purposes only, with a recommendation that comments be referred back to staff for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Healy. And for the applicant.
Good evening, Your Worship. It's Murray Evans here, Mission Control. Thank you for hearing us tonight. The application as Jeff had indicated, is fairly straightforward. It's an application to allow 3 semi-detached buildings, a total of 6 units on this property. It's in the Harris Beach infill area. The lots to be created will ultimately be 15 meters wide, and they have extremely long depths. If I can get Ryan, can I get you to flip to, and so we've seen where it is. If you can go to the next one, please. So this is the layout that's a derivative of the sketch that you saw in the staff report. So this is the proposed layout, and the lot depths from, I guess, from the street line to the back property line are 88 meters deep. So they're extremely large lots. However, as you can see, towards the south end of the lot, there's some curved lines. We've been out on the property with city staff and TRCA staff. We've delineated the edge of the feature, which is the southerly dotted line, and then the parallel line is a 10-meter buffer. So even taking that into account, the lot depths are in the area of 55 to 60 meters deep. And even building at a reasonable and appropriate coverage would still yield backyards of 25 to 30 meters in depth. So these are quite large lots. Unfortunately, from a land use economy point of view, we couldn't get another tier of lots in behind those with a road or a private lane and another set of dwellings. So we're somewhat stymied because of the extent of the valley feature to the south. Only a single row of homes will be allowed, or can fit, quite frankly. So as you may recall, or if you read the staff report, there's some commentary about landform conservation requirements and also the protection of some environmental features. Interestingly, the quote unquote finger extension of trees is located within the feature. So we believe, quite frankly, that our natural heritage evaluation, which has been submitted to the city, is appropriate, and that with the buffer, there's still plenty of land left to address any environmental considerations, particularly the landform conservation, which tends to put requirements or controls on the amount of land which you can disturb in an area such as this. But ironically, and Ryan, if I can get you to go to the next slide, please. This is a concept map of the area that's the Harris Beach area. And I guess for better or for worse, our firm has been involved in many of these applications. And you can see to the north on Harris Avenue is the countrywide subdivision. That's about 15 acres of land that has been approved. There are some revised lotting plans which will be before you in about a month's time as a little bit of a teaser to council. But I can tell you that a site alteration permit has been issued and the site is being graded as we speak. So it's quite, and if you are also familiar with the area, immediately to the east of that is the Heathwood subdivision, which has been graded and built upon. So it's quite ironic that for whatever reason, we have a landform conservation concern on this particular lot. But we, as I said, given the size of the lots, I don't anticipate any issues with being able to satisfy the controls in the marine document and also in the city's official plan. The use of semi-detached homes here, as you read in the staff report, and again, if Ryan, can I get you to go one more, please? There you go. That's the Harris Beach infill study. The property is generally shown in the red highlight. It's the yellow area, which is a low density residential area, which permits singles and semis. And the principle of the semis here is that when you combine the two sides of the semi, you will get a very large built form, which would match or blend with the homes on the north side of the road, hopefully be in keeping with the remaining homes that are left in the area, and also be very similar or reflective of what has been approved in the countrywide subdivision to the north on the lands that are adjacent to beach. So the plan before you, I believe, as you can see in the staff report, conforms to the official plan, is consistent with what was drawn up and desired in the neighborhood plan. We will be awaiting the eventual development of the countrywide plan to get the services which will be needed to accommodate this proposed land use. And we believe it's certainly in keeping with what's in the area. And I will leave it at that. And if there's any questions of council, I'll be pleased to answer them.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Evans. We do have some correspondence, just one item. We have one delegate, and that was yourself, sir, Mr. Evans. So I'm assuming that's how that was going to be dealt with. And so I guess I'll turn it over to the counselor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the applicant and to staff for making the presentations. I think this application is certainly in keeping with what was envisioned in the Harris Beach infill study. I do appreciate that on one of the pages, I think it was page 4, there's a table that outlines the number of categories that this application complies to what the various documentation that we have at the city guiding this development would ask for. And I mean, it's pretty much 100%. So I appreciate that. As Mr. Evans had mentioned, on page 6, there's certainly some comments about the delineating and confirming the edge of top of bank, which is certainly a part of that property. And so I assume that staff and TRCA will work through that as time goes on, and that will be properly dealt with. That's about it. I mean, the staff report is fairly concise in talking about some of the remaining issues that need to be dealt with, but I think that that pretty much covers the main things that need to be considered as we move forward with this. So I would be happy, Mr. Mayor, to move the staff recommendation to refer all comments back to staff and move this along in the process. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have a seconder, please? I do that, Councilor Corelli. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you everyone for their presentation. Just a question. Mr. Evans had mentioned that there's 3 semis. I counted 6. Is that just a difference of definition? Is it 6 semis or is it 3 semis?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's 3 semi-detached lots, which will result in 6 individual dwelling units.
Correct. I just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you, Mr. Evans, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity. Happy to second the motion.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments at this point in time? Seeing none, all those in favor, front back, opposed, that carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. All right, we'll now move to the second item. We have here is dealing with zoning in Bayview Avenue, 13572, 13586. And I would ask our member of Planning Department, Simone Fiore, describe the application to us.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Bear, members of council, and the public. The final public meeting tonight involves official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications for the lands municipally known as 13572 and 13586 Bayview Avenue. Next slide, please. The subject lands consist of 2 existing residential lots that are located on the west side of Bayview Avenue, north of Snively Street, and have a total lot area of 1.0977 hectares. The lands abut the Wilcox-St. George provincially significant wetland complex to the north, south, and west, Bayview Avenue to the east, and a single detached dwelling immediately to the south. The lands are designated neighborhood and natural core in the city's official plan. Uses within the neighborhood designation include, where lands front on an arterial street include medium density residential uses such as townhouses and multi-unit walk-up apartments with building heights of up to 4 stories and a maximum density of 50 units per hectare. Permitted uses in the natural core designation include fish, wildlife, and forest management, conservation projects, flood and erosion control projects, essential infrastructure, low intensity recreational uses, unserviced parks, and accessory uses. With respect to the zoning, the subject lands are zoned agricultural zone under bylaw 1703 as amended. In July 2015, Council approved official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications, city files D01-10006 and D02-100018, to permit a 4-story, 48 dwelling unit residential apartment building having a density of 106.6 units per net residential hectare on the subject lands. Subsequently, Council adopted official plan amendment 280 on September 29, 2015 to implement said development. In accordance with Council's decision on these applications, prior to bringing forward the implementing zoning bylaw for enactment, the applicant was to obtain site plan approval for their proposed development. However, a site plan application was not submitted and therefore the implementing zoning bylaw was never enacted. Next slide, please. The lands have since been sold to the current owners who have submitted the subject official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications to permit an 11-story high-density residential development comprised of 122 units on their land holdings. Therefore, the applicant is seeking Council's approval of its official plan amendment to permit a high-rise, high-density residential building, an increase in permitted building height from 4 stories to 11 stories, and an increase in maximum permitted density from 50 units per hectare to 111 units per hectare. Next slide, please. The applicant is also proposing to rezone the subject lands from agricultural zone under bylaw 1703 to multiple residential 1 zone and environmental protection 2 zone under bylaw 31396 with site-specific development standards to facilitate the proposed development. Staff have circulated the applications to internal departments and external agencies for review and comment. At this time, several comments remain outstanding. The purpose of the report is to provide Council and the public with an overview of the applicant's development proposal and has been structured for information purposes only, with the recommendations that all comments be referred back to staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fiore. And on behalf of the applicant,
Expand. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. There we go with the presentation. I'd like to go through several slides quickly. My name is Rob Gibson with Evans Planning, and I'll be going through the few slides presentation on behalf of the agents on behalf of A1 Developments Inc. for the proposal 13572, 13586 Bayview Avenue. Next slide, please. We've gone through this. The subject lands are on the west side of Bayview Avenue, just south of Bloomington Road. Next slide. Subject lands are currently the site of 2 houses, detached houses, about slightly over 1 hectare and roughly 100 meters square property. The Wilcox St. George provincially significant wetland, as you see, is on the north and the west side of the property, and detached houses are to the south. Next slide. Official plan designation, neighborhood with, as Simone has mentioned, 50 units per hectare and 4-story maximums on arterial roads, and the natural core designation you can see to the west and north of the subject site. Next slide. The current zoning is agricultural, and as mentioned, in 2015, council approved the rezoning from the agricultural use to a multiple residential 1 zone and environmental protection area. It was subject to receiving a site plan application, which was not executed, and the site is still currently zoned agricultural use. Next slide, please. The zoning was to follow from an OPA 280 that was approved in council by 2015, which established the 4-story residential building and permitted the higher densities on the net site of 106.6 units per net residential hectare. Next slide. And the site plan was, and the OPA was based on this site plan in 2015 that provided for the wetland and buffer limits that's noted on the line in green. That is to the north, as well as to the green to the south, that created the buffer areas. And then the blue line represents the footprint of the site plan that for the development approved in 2015. Next slide, please. So the proposal before us now is, by and large, is taking those environmental policies and environmental direction that was done in 2015. It's been driving the application from the get-go. The green shows the environmental areas and the wetland and the buffer limits that would be lands that would be publicly conveyed. And the proposed building footprint, as you can see, largely represents a very similar footprint to what was considered in 2015. And next slide, please. In 2015, you can see the elevations where it was a 4-story of residential uses with 1 level of parking that was also done in an above grade condition to, again, respect the environmental groundwater conditions. Next slide. And you'll see this is then the 2020 version and the elevations with 11 stories. It has essentially 8 stories of residential with the 3 levels of above grade parking. We go to the next slide. You can see where essentially the 4 stories that are on the top, those are additional 4 levels. They're located centrally on the building. And then in red, you can see where essentially within the footprint, the 2 additional levels of parking have been added. And that shows you basically the view from Bayview is the north, and the south image is the view from the south elevation. And next slide, please. And in terms of scale and transition, certainly in terms of transitioning to the neighborhood to the south, the 45-degree angular plane has been utilized, and minor encroachments on the angular plane is shown on that picture in the top right. And the scale and massing of the building in the photograph on the south, you can see the angular plane. The building is underneath that 45-degree angular plane to provide for the public realm and limit massing upon the Bayview Avenue streetscape. Next slide. And just in closing, I'd like to basically say that essentially we've been working with, in the pre-application, we've been working with staff and the TRCA. We continue to work with them in terms of the, and with the local counselor and consulting with them on making sure that the environmental premises of the development that were established in 2015 are carried forward. And we've been working with them. We'll continue to work with them through our natural heritage evaluation. And these essentially show the rendering. If you want to go to the next slide, it then shows some of the terracing, step backs and massing, as well as the environmental buffer areas that we protected through the application.
He's giving you the
and
thing.
If you have any questions on the application, be pleased to answer them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a large amount of correspondence here, but we also have some delegations, which I will ask to bring forward. Do we have Rob Gibson? Okay, we've just heard from Rob Gibson. There we go. Carol Davidson as a delegate here. There you are. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A recent survey conducted by Richmond Hill found that the #1 priority for residents was preserving the natural environment. I believe this proposal has received many letters from residents because there's great interest in preserving the natural environment. This developer wants council to change the official plan and some bylaws to allow the building of a condo that is the opposite of putting nature first. The building site is a very small strip of land beside a wetland. The staff report says that the plan will encroach on the natural area, and it's easy to see why. Since the land is on the Oak Ridges Moraine, it is currently zoned for a maximum of 4 stories. The builder wants to build a high-rise with 11 stories. The land is approved for 48 living units. The developer wants to build 122. The land is on regional greenland system intended to protect its natural features. The wetland is a natural core designation meant to maintain or improve natural features, including fish, wildlife, and forests. The condo will encroach on that. Aside from the environmental devastation this condo will bring, building on a wetland makes no sense for other reasons. We've already seen the effects of climate change, including unusually heavy rainfalls. Where will the water go in that area if you don't preserve the wetland? In the streets, on resident properties, into their basements? I'm not an engineer, but I can tell you what I've already seen in Oak Ridges. Neighboring houses might be hard hit if this condo is allowed. I know several people in Oak Ridges who have older homes that were dry until construction of much larger units nearby. They now have wet yards, and every year more have wet basements. Near North Lake Road, there are homes that run sump pumps almost 24 hours a day. I'd be happy to show you the runoff into the street gutter. The wet properties are not always the new homes that are built on former wetland, but often older homes on properties that receive much more water when it rains or snows because the natural wetland is gone. Water has to go somewhere, and it doesn't care where it goes. Construction on wetlands brings other issues too. This plan includes above ground parking, too wet for basements on that strip of land, so massive supports will have to be driven into the ground to support the building. That can damage surrounding homes. One resident near Lake Wilcox couldn't open some of their doors in their home because the vibrations from a nearby build actually shifted their house. And what happens once the building is finished? Can you guarantee the massive condo won't sink over time? For example, the Lake Wilcox Boardwalk, it's finished now, but it took a few tries because pylons sank right into the silt. The proposed development is considered high density, and this is not a high density zone building. It's not a transportation hub. There are no stores or conveniences nearby. You can't walk anywhere. It's a bad idea. I would like to take my remaining time to ask Councillor Barrows some questions. You have a campaign in Oak Ridges calling to stop bad development. Can you please define bad development? And is this condo bad development, Councillor Barrows? Thank you.
Okay. He will come forward when it's his turn to speak, all right? Thank you, all right, Mr. Barrows. All right, our second delegate is Anna Kujarchuk. Sorry.
Mr. Mayor, Anna's not here. We'll bring in
Okay.
the next.
Mr. Wong, Preston Wong. Mr. Wong? There you are, sir. Sir, just you need to put on, there you go. Sir, go ahead. 5 minutes, please.
Yeah, okay. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and honorable council members, as well as citizens who are concerned in our neighborhood here listening tonight. I am Preston Wong, and I'm a resident of the Oak Ridges area for 16 years. And I personally, with my family, strongly object the proposed condominium development and amendment plans that have been proposed here. I am not against development. In fact, this is one of the main reasons why we live here today, is because development has been allowed. But what I am pro for, alongside with my family, I'm sure many of the neighbors feel the same way as well, is for responsible development. And similar to what we just heard from Ms. Davidson earlier, you know, we really need to evaluate how responsible is this development for where it is situated and how it has been proposed relative to the following concerns that I'm going to bring up to you. So what I'd like to share with you is a 4-point presentation. And the first one has to do with really undue stress of traffic and noise pollution, not to mention light pollution, that really would affect directly the area for vehicular traffic, as well as associated noise and environmental impacts for a building that is 8 stories high and adjacent to a significant wetland area. Challenges in maintaining area safety and convenience in its current state really present some concerns to me. Second point, and I think we heard the same thing mentioned earlier as well tonight, there are concerns of how this threatens the Ontario Wetlands Conservation Strategy. I know we saw some diagrams and depictions of its base being right on the perimeter of the wetland with the buffer considered, but we need to look at the vertical presentment that this presents to the nearby area, to the birds, to the animals, to the environment. Even with the 45-degree allowance for, you know, the house right next to it. It also presents a very interesting fit, which I will talk about in a second. So the third point is leading into the community character and integration of this building in the neighborhood, because it really stands out the way we see it. And I'm not sure it stands out for the right reasons, quite honestly. Having lived here for 16 years and looking at a radius of about 5 kilometers, I do not see another building that looks anything like what's being proposed. In fact, it stands out because it stands out. It's high. And I don't know what studies have been or can be done to look at the impact of this this building in its community character. And we heard a lot about the negative effects in the Oak Ridges area, especially as it relates to water flow. I work for a financial insurance company, and our number one threat right now is water, as it relates to the affordability of, you know, property insurance and sewer backup claims. So one of the main things that I'm concerned about is the future of that impact in the character integration of this this condominium in the area. Last point relating to that is, how does this present itself to an overcrowded and underserviced school education solution for that area when you introduce so many units and the potential for an immediate addition of that many school attendees? My last point, which is the fourth, is a deviation from what we know from a long time ago as an Ontario places to grow policy. This is not the first time that I've quoted this policy, and many of you might remember that from a long time ago. But I do fully believe that there is a misalignment of this development relative to what is proposed in the Ontario Places to Grow policy. Specifically, it's in conflict with managing growth under 2.2.1 Section B as a guideline to limit growth in the Greenbelt area, specifically the Oak Ridges Moraine. So in closing, I would like to leave you with this. It's a simple question, and many of you have the responsibility and the influence to make this decision. How does this proposed amendment and development sustain a win-win solution for the residents, the wildlife, and the overall environment balance that we currently enjoy without such development? I leave this one extra question with you. Would you even debate this for 1 second if this development was on the edge of Lake Wilcox? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Appreciate that. We still have another person we are waiting for, Ms. Kucharzik? No? Okay, it's not here. We shall now turn to Councillor Barrows, local council.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Oak Ridges Lake Wilcox is a fantastic community. It is one of the jewels in the city of Richmond Hill. When I was elected in 2006 and subsequently elected those years after, the number one thing that was on the minds of people was the environment. And we took that very seriously. If you go to YouTube, you'll see a number of videos where I'm either walking through the woodlands with the TRCA, or I'm out on Lake Wilcox with then town staff explaining Lake Wilcox and its health. And it's a success story for all of us on council to be able to say that Lake Wilcox is gotten better. And some would say, how's that possible? With all the development we've seen, the lake is getting better. Well, yeah, with development comes stormwater ponds, comes, making sure that the runoff is not going into the lake. So the overall environment of Oak Ridges Lake Wilcox is a very, very important thing. When we take a look at this application and the previous application, which kind of started the whole process, the first thing I said to the previous applicant was, if you're not looking after the environment, it's a non-starter. And to this next applicant who's now working on it, it's the same comment. If you're not looking after the environment, it's a complete non-starter. I mean, that's been something that has been on the residents' minds for a long time. How can we make Oak Ridges, Lake Wilcox in Richmond Hill a better place? And through smart development, we've been able to achieve that. So my message to Mr. Evans and to the team there is, you need to be very cognizant of that very, very special place there on Lake Wilcox. And not just Lake Wilcox, but of course the Snively wetland. We've seen an awful lot of development in that area. So building upon a lot of the studies that have been done there, and of course, city staff is going to keep your feet to the fire to make sure that nothing is done untoward to the environment, and whatever changes need to be made to any kind of application that comes in this area. And I'm not even just speaking now to this applicant, I'm speaking to applications in the area. They always need to be cognizant of environment first, and then from there, things can get built on. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to move the motion that we receive all comments, send them to staff. And I'm looking forward to seeing, what staff have to say as this process, moves on. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, Mr. Mayor. That's my motion.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Councillor Corelli.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to second Councillor Barros's motion. I do have a few questions since the planner for the applicant has offered to answer some questions. I was taking some notes during the delegations, and through you, Mr. Mayor, I forgot the gentleman's name. My apologies. With Evans Planning, the gentleman's name?
Robert Gibson.
Robert Gibson, Mr. Gibson, yes. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Gibson. I, like Councillor Barros, have concerns about the environment. Mr. Mayor, if I just take the opportunity, a lot of people are already aware that the climate is one of my #1 priorities, and the environment. And today I launched my survey to all the residents of Richmond Hill, and I encourage them all to participate either through electronic forms or through the newsletter that's going to everybody's house in Richmond Hill. So I encourage everybody to please fill out the environment is our #1 priority for our planet. Now, that being said, is it Gibson?
Yes.
It says Murray Evans on the screen, and I know you're not Murray.
Murray's right here, and I'm right over
You're much too handsome to be Murray.
Oh, he's listening.
Oh, oops, sorry. So back to the issue before us, you can see, Mr. Gibson, that the #1 priority here is that there better be protection of, I may not be using the right words, but the wetlands, the natural area, the natural features, etc. Now, I did notice on certain maps, I think it was map #2 that was presented, I saw that, and I'm not as familiar as the area as Councillor Barros is, but I noticed there's houses around the wetlands, and they've done some development in the area and respected the natural core. So my question to you, it's been suggested that your applicant seeks to encroach on the natural area. What I saw in terms of the drawing, unless that wasn't reflective or to scale, it didn't appear that you were encroaching on the area. Are you encroaching on the natural area?
The drawing is a little bit schematic and not detailed in that way, but there are a few minor locations along the edge of the buffer where the building envelope, I would say, has with a few meters of encroachment in the buffer. That's been noted in the comments we've received from the TRCA and from staff. So in the review of the application and going forward, we're going to be refining both the natural feature limits as well as the buffer areas, and we will come back with a refined application and do certainly our best to make sure we will stay out of the buffer areas, and we will make sure that those areas are the lands to be conveyed to the public interest to protect the environment for an ongoing forever. So.
Thank you. The second question through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Gibson. It has also been suggested that you're not going to protect the natural features. I guess you've already answered that question. You do and will be protecting those natural features?
Pardon me?
You will be protecting the natural features?
Absolutely, yes. So at this stage, the zoning bylaw, we're setting the envelope and the setbacks, identifying the limits of the feature. Those details in terms of the restoration and the planting of those buffer areas, that will come as well in terms of not just conveying, but also making improvements to that environment as it is currently. I think also it's important to note on the groundwater situation where the approvals that were done in 2015 were in many respects done to make sure that the foundations don't go below into the groundwater. We did consult before the application to see whether we would be able to go in a below ground condition, in that way put the parking below grade. That was not something that was supported by the TRCA. So we essentially, that has caused then some of the building height to come up higher than you might otherwise have with a building. And essentially it was done to, again, respect that protection of the groundwater on a permanent basis. And as well, there'll be water balances will have to be maintained so that there's, again, no impacts on the natural environment.
Thank you. Third question through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Gibson. It's also been suggested that you might be building in or on the wetlands?
Not at all, no. The minor encroachments on our current plan were a few meters within to the buffer areas, which are.
Now, please explain the difference between the wetland and the buffer areas.
There's the actual feature, the actual features are the provincially significant wetland there and the wetland to the south. Those are identified, those are being refined, and then there will be 30 meter and 10 meter setbacks that will be buffer areas that will be conveyed to the town, the public interest, and those will be part of the natural environment.
So just to be clear, what you're actually doing is you're saying the protected features are here, but we're going to stay an extra 10 or 30 meters away from it, as a matter of fact, and give that land to the municipality or the TRCA.
Correct.
So that they could forever protect that area, actually expanding that area.
Correct.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. And the last question I have for you, Mr. Gibson, it's also been suggested that somehow this application will affect where the water goes and somehow flood neighboring communities because of your application. My question to you is, how are you, on behalf of the applicant, and if it's not yours to answer, please address it to somebody else, but how will you ensure the community that your project will not have any negative effect in the community? What are the steps you're taking towards that mitigation?
In large part, it would be through our review where we've done our analysis of a water balance that needs to be achieved. It's under the review of the Conservation Authority. They will be issuing permits for any development in this area, and they will assure, as we will, that there's a water balance is provided and the natural environment is protected through the approvals process. So, I think that we're really taking what was historically done in 2015. There were some principles established there in terms of protecting the wetland, providing for buffers, and providing for that permanent protection of that in the public interest. And we're really trying to stick to those principles and move forward with the current application on those grounds and not changing it in any way. So we will go through the Conservation Authority and continue to work with them through the application process.
And next question is, there will be obviously some trees being affected by this application. Do you have a plan in place to not only replace the trees that you may have to remove for the application and enhancing the the tree canopy in the area so that we're not taking away from the environment?
Yes, absolutely. In terms of planting plans, there is a planting plan that's been established. We did do a landscape concept plan that was in the buffer area. The comments back from Conservation Authority is that they prefer that to be a naturalized area without any pathways, walkways. So we'll be continuing to work with them as we refine the application to make sure that the tree planting and replacements are achieved, and particularly in those naturalized areas.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, just in closing, my comments are these. I'm fairly confident that the applicant now is aware of what the priority is here. The priority is to protect the environment, notwithstanding your footprint and your floors and all of the other issues that will be dealt with through the regular planning channels. What's special about this property, and there is some potential to develop it, but under no circumstance are you going to violate the environment. I will not support any application that has any kind of negative impact on the environment. I'm happy to know that you're on board as well and that you're looking into all of those things. But please be forewarned. We have wonderful staff here that are going to make sure and hold your feet to the fire, as the saying goes, to make sure that the environment is protected. As well, we have the TRCA, and they're no slouches when it comes to protecting the environment. And you also have Councillor Barros, who is a strong advocate for the environment, and under no circumstances will his determination be detoured in any way, shape, or form if this applicant doesn't recognize the importance of the environment to Councillor Barros and all the members of council, including the mayor, of course. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't go over my 5 minutes because the time Mr. Gibson answered was not included in the 5 minutes, Mr. Mayor. But thank you, Mr. Gibson, for all of your answers that I saw Mr. Evans coaching you from the background. It was a team effort. Very good.
Thank you.
We got, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. If there's a second round, I may have further questions depending on how this goes. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor DePaula, I saw your hand up earlier.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not a lot to add from what my colleagues have said, but there's one thing I just want to point out to the concerned residents in the area and those that have expressed interest in this application. It's just important that we are very clear about what the Oak Ridge Marine Act is. The Oak Ridge Marine Act is an excellent piece of legislation. In Richmond Hill, it protects over 1,000 acres that will never be built upon. But the Oak Ridge Marine is not completely a protected area. It is a definition of land use designations, and there is natural core, there's natural linkage, there's countryside, but then there's also settlement areas. So that provincial legislation has defined where there can be development, and more and more over in the coming years, we're going to see some applications on the last remaining developable areas in Richmond Hill, and I don't want there to ever be confusion that we're building in the Oak Ridges Moraine. To make that statement is unfair. We never do. We build in settlement areas in the Oak Ridges Moraine, and we work very hard to protect and uphold those natural core linkage and countryside areas that is protected. And near and dear to me, Mr. Mayor, as a resident of Oak Ridges for quite some time, I wouldn't allow anything to jeopardize those parks and lakes that we have, and we are so fortunate to have. And there's no other place in the GTA really that can claim 5 lakes and the forests and what we have in Richmond Hill. So we're going to work hard to keep it that way, but there are some parcels of land that can be developed, and if it's done responsibly, we will allow them to do so. So I look forward to our staff's report on whether this application meets all the strict criteria that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor West. And that's the last speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So thank you to the staff for the staff report. Thank you for the applicant for outlining your stance on this. The staff report is good. There's a number of issues that haven't been covered up to this point in council's comments anyway. So this is an environmentally sensitive site. There's no question about it. I mean, it's a provincially significant wetland, which is no small thing. I think as a result of that, I would have expected to see a much more modest application here that is more in keeping with something that would be right beside an environmentally sensitive site like a provincially significant wetland. I think that in itself is means that we need to take extra precautions to be protecting that. This application is bigger than the official plan has laid out, and it doesn't, as by definition, go any further distance to protect the environment. And as a matter of fact, I mean, paving over that amount of land and putting this type of development on that land will in no way, shape, or form make the environment better. It will probably make erode the environment to some degree on a number of different levels. So the best way to protect that site would be for us to stick to something much closer to the official plan and make a much more modest application than what is before us right now. A few, obvious indicators that this is way too big is that I actually am getting a little tired of talking about 45-degree angular planes so much, because in actual fact, the limiting factor in this case is not 45-degree angular plane, it's the height of the building, which is outlined in the OP. However, having said that, the 45-degree angular plane in this particular application can't even be met. So we're not going further to protect the environment in this application. We are actually not protecting the environment, and that would be one of the indicators. There is a comment in the staff report, and in most of the correspondence that we've received, it's also said that this does not fit into the character of this neighborhood. I'm actually very surprised to see an 11-story building being proposed in a place like this. I mean, regardless of the environmentally sensitive area, this is not an area where we're going to see really great public transit for quite some time. It is not a transit-oriented development, and it is not the density that I would expect in an area like that. It's the density that you'd expect in a more urban area with better transit and so on. So I don't think that really fits the bill either. I think, it's important for us on council to be filtering out the applications that are appropriate and the applications that are not appropriate. I mean, that's our job. The applicants can propose whatever they want, but I mean, in this particular case, I can't support this in the form that it is right now. It will not be good planning. As a matter of fact, I would be actually very surprised to have even seen this application come forward. I would suggest very strongly that it is not an appropriate application for this area. And I would like to see the applicant go back to the drawing board, frankly, and go back to something much more close to what the official plan would allow. So those would be my comments, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate the opportunity to present them.
No, that's fine. Go ahead. Councillor Chan, you wish to comment too?
In fact, Mr. Mayor, I think that Councillor Sivlis have raised her hand before me. So I'm happy if
Okay.
you let her speak first.
Councillor Silivitz, sorry, I did not see you.
Thank you, Councillor Chan. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the applicant and our staff for their presentations. And I would also like to thank all the residents who wrote in regarding this particular application. I believe it behooves us in the highest form to ensure that we take note of all of those pieces of communication. There were many, and one of the most that I've seen for a very, very long time. So, and they all the pieces of communication basically say the same thing, that the residents are not happy with this particular application. And I concur with what Councillor West says, that I could not support this application as it stands. But I do know Murray Evans and Evans Planning very well. And I do know that Mr. Evans and Evans Planning listens to council and listens to the residents with the greatest of respect. So I have no doubt that as we move through this process, because remember again tonight, this is simply to receive all comments. I have no doubt that Mr. Evans and Robert and Evans Planning will continue to have collaborative discussions with the local councillor, and with our staff. I will be very interested to see what final recommendations come from the TRCA and the region. I agree with Mr. Wong, one of our delegates, where he mentioned the word responsible, and I believe that that is a key word here. We must be responsible in what we approve as land use planning applications, anywhere in the city, but most especially anywhere on the Oak Ridges Moraine and near the Greenbelt. So we have to make sure that there are no negative environmental impacts, or if there are any, that they're kept to an absolute minimum, that there are appropriate buffers, and that the heights do not height of a proposed built asset does not negatively impact the surrounding residential areas. I believe very strongly that we must conserve the Oak Ridges Moraine as described in legislation, and the continuous chipping away that we tend to see in applications continuously chips away at the integrity of the Oak Ridges Moraine. And we have to be very careful that that does not happen, and that any application that would come anywhere close to that deserves our greatest attention. I appreciate the fact that the height of this building is increased because we have to have above ground parking. And I also appreciate that because it means that the developer, the planning company is aware of the fact that they could pierce the Oak Ridges Moraine cap. And that is something that must never happen. So while I am appreciative of the fact that there are 2 floors of above ground parking, it increases the height of the building. I think that something needs to be looked at there, because I would like to see the height of this building lowered, and therefore, of course, the parking. So I know it's complicated, but I urge the applicant to consider the 45-degree angle. I urge the applicant to be respectful of the buffering areas, which, Robert, thank you. You did say that there would be the appropriate measures taken there, but also look at the size of your footprint actual of the built asset and perhaps reduce it so that the buffers are indeed protected. By reducing your footprint actual, you will, by way of doing that, have to decrease the height and density. So I look forward to seeing whatever comes back to council and to the residents as we move forward with this. Again, please be very aware of the protection of the surrounding natural features and wetlands, and be very aware of the amount of communications that came in from residents who are 100% against the specific type of application. As Mr. Wong said, not against development, but against what is proposed before us. So I am quite sure that Simone and our planning department and everybody with Evans Planning will continue this discussion. And I look forward to when we see this coming before council again. Thank you very much. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Councillor Chan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank our planning staff for doing a comprehensive report and the presentation today, and Mr. Gibson on behalf of the applicant, and particularly thank you for the 2 delegates, Ms. Davidson and Mr. Wong, if I remember your name correctly, and the people who wrote in. I'm not going to draw in more because I'm hearing all the speakers before me, my dear colleagues, they're all affirming environment first. So I see the nod ahead, even though we're at a distance apart, but I think there's some consistency there. And I can see Mr. Gibson is taking notes on that, which is great. So I just want to add my word. Yes, environment is first, and Richmond Hill, like even the local council background, you can see all the background surrounding the lines are green. I mean, green is the word. Having said that, I'm also quite mindful that I think was mentioned, the TRCA, the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, is the other quote unquote public level that we look at it very seriously. So on the ground, at this point in time, I would say that the applicant probably through the agents want to listen and maybe look at how you're doing on the ground. Now, within this time that I have, I like to just, Mr. Mayor, comment, and people before me already said, I think one of the delegates, maybe Mr. Wong, talking about the vertical part, that I'm not going to get into the 45 degrees, which one of my colleagues talked about, or the speaker just before me talking about, I will echo the appearances of our character. I know those are only artistic rendering at this point in time. But through you, Mr. Chair, specifically on, I believe, probably Mr. Wong, that talking about this application is not aligning with the places to grow. And I just want to, through you, Mr. Chair, to question to our staff, what's your view, or you can advise council, in your professional view, based on what you understand, is the application, what they're proposing is misaligned with places to grow? That's my question for you, Mr. Chair.
All right.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Part of the test for reviewing all applications is to review for conformity with provincial policy. The Places to Grow Act, the provincial policy statements, which include issues with respect to the natural environment and growth potential and wise use of built infrastructure. So to the extent that it aligns, subject to compliance with all of the particular regulations by the commenting agencies, I think ultimately the conclusion would be that it is in conformity. What we're talking here about is the overall design and use of the property for its best purposes, not necessarily whether or not it should be built on at all.
Okay, thank you. So in the end, the review would say yes or no on that question. Thank you for that, Commissioner. So I gather the final thing I would say is that on the ground, we're talking about the environmental concerns and the issues we look at, but also vertically. And I hope the applicants, agents are taking a good note of all those comments from my colleagues and myself. And perhaps there's a way to reshape and reform with an application that respect that. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, for me to share my comments.
Well, thank you for your comments. Councillor Munch, sorry.
Good, thank you, Chair, Mayor. Thank you for the application. Thank you for all the delegates came forward, all the correspondence. I listened to the comments and I agree with many of them. Where I'd like to go in addition, so we do this back for comments that are qualified, I would say to you that Richmond Hill absolutely should continue to take the lead on environmental issues, and the Oak Ridge Moraine is one of the jewels within our assets within Richmond Hill. And I hope that we protect our watersheds and our natural core and natural link. And I have not heard any member of council, anybody else ever challenge that. So I applaud council this term and previous for doing that. Where I'd like to go with staff is to talk about permeability, regardless of what's being built or not being built, especially on places like the environment, the permeability of the actual development that may or may not evolve out of this particular area, certainly on the Oak Ridge Moraine, needs to be at the forefront. And I would like to once again reiterate that. And just so those that were clear on what permeability is, so we can define what that is. It's when we have a grass product, for example, we say that grass product is a good environment product because it allows for the water to naturally go through its corridor. There are many, many building materials like rooftop patios that have environmental benefits that do not impact stormwater management or the environment, as is the same thing with asphalt and concrete, which are not permeable I would argue that any application that goes through anywhere in the Oak Ridge Moraine should be absolutely paramount, and I would expect to see that, which I did not see in this application or any other report. But I'll be looking at that going forward because it's something that is out there. It's being used, by the way, Mississauga, Toronto, Waterfront Club, TTC, Pickering, Markham are doing very similar things. And I think that's about time Richmond Hill gets in the act of getting into the permeability of our landscape for development, because we do have a high water table and we do have a Oak Ridge Moraine, which is a gem. So in this particular application or others, I would say certainly any place that's near that moraine or where that green belt, I would expect that in high water table. Also, I would say to you moving forward, something I'll be looking forward, just for the record. So I say to the delegates that came forward and for those that commented on the high concern, as well as some members of council who said the Oak Ridge Moraine is important and the green belt is important for us as a whole. I would hope that all of us in Richmond Hill care about not just the Oak Ridge Moraine, but that is the gem and the linkage and the what was said to by the Deputy Mayor Perot, De Paula. I want to make that clear. The Oak Ridge Moraine has 4 classifications, which allows development, which is settlement, has countryside, which is farms. It has natural core, which is our protected watershed, and our linkage, what I like to call deer going up and back and forth. So I want to make sure that the natural core and natural linkage, which is what a lot of people think the Oak Ridge Moraine stands for, certainly those 2 aspects of the Oak Ridge Moraine have to be embedded and certainly from my perspective are unrelenting on how we're going to protect that for hopefully generations to come. And where I stand today as member of council will be enshrining those policies and working alongside with the province on how they're doing that. So that's my comments. Thank you. I hope you all have a great day.
Okay, thank you, Councilor much. Councilor Liu.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say that I agree with all the comments that made by my colleagues. There's no doubt environment is the biggest issue here, but it's not the only issues. When I look at the staff report, page 10, the first 4 bullets, it's all about height and density. And I think 11 stories with 111 units is a bit too much in that area. And I have to agree with one of the delegates, I think it's Mr. Wong, said that, just imagine with 11 stories, 111 units, and the light pollution that is going to cause to the area is going to be enormous. So I think the applicant has to, go back to the drawing board, talk to our staff. For me, I have to steal a word from the local councillor, Councillor Barrows, is a non-starter. What's in front of me is a non-starter. But I'm sure, as Councillor Silva said, Mr. Evans is one of the best in the industry, and I'm sure that he will go back to the drawing board and work out with our staff and make something that is compatible and respectful to the existing neighborhood. So that's all my comments, and thank you for the opportunity to speak, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. That brings us to everyone has spoken. We want to put it, we have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor, opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Motion to adjourn. Please, Councilor Stellis, Councilor Corrali, all those in favor, please carry. Thank you all.